Brian, you realize they can hear you sniffling like that, right? Are we on? Did you cut to the picture, Brian? Okay, I'm in the box. All right, well, we're good. Well, good afternoon. This is Tuesday. It's 2 o'clock. It's just turned 2 o'clock. So it's Tuesday and it's 2 o'clock. And Brian Marks is running the audio for us. And he's looking like he's going to touch some other buttons, but I got to tell him not to. So, Brian, you want to say hi?
Hello.
So it's good to have Brian here with me because then he can run some of that video stuff while I talk with you guys and work through some things. So real quick, just some announcements. It looks like winter is not quite here yet. Fall is giving us some really nice and beautiful days, so we want to try to experience those as much as possible. And I think, I'm not positive of this, so just keep your eyes open, but I think we're going to have our fall harvest party after church the last Sunday of October. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, maybe put that on your calendar for the last Sunday of October after church. We usually do we call it a Super Sunday, but it's really hard, because one person wants to call it a Super Sunday, and then someone calls it the Fall Harvest Party. So I think it would be just as good to call it our Fall Harvest Party. It's just a general harvest party. That way, if we ever want to change up themes and we don't want to do the soup, we don't have to call it Super Sunday. But I think what we're going to try to do is people can bring soups or dishes to pass, and then we'll probably have a bunch of hot dogs and some things like that because we did that for the baptism, and that seemed to work really well. So we'll see. Maybe because of COVID, we may not have anybody bring anything, but I don't know that that's going to be a problem, but we'll see. So just be listening for that and watching out for that information. The other thing is that men's group meets once a month on Saturdays. And Brian has been trying to organize that and get some guys out, but we don't always have a lot of, fun things to do. Like one time we just threw axes. That wasn't really that fun. And then one time we went and we shot guns at a gun range. And that wasn't really that fun. And then sometimes almost all the time we get together and have breakfast. Brian and David and them cook breakfast for everybody. And then there's been a couple times where we've just had kind of some Bible studies, and that was just a blast, when we had the Bible studies. So everybody enjoyed that. So I guess what I'm getting at is that guys are a little different. They usually are not really intrigued about getting together unless it's some kind of a serious event. So Brian has been trying to think of different events, but we need your help as well, guys, and we need to know if you're available to come. So Brian, do you want to talk a little bit more? You want to just add something to that and let people know when the next men's group is going to be? Brian, you want to do that into that mic?
Is this on?
Yes, it's on.
I just want to say the men's group will be the second Saturday of November. I don't have the date on me. And I send the guys an email, letting them know what goes on.
Okay. And if for some reason you want the information, you got to let us know.
And you can just let us know and give me your email, and I'll email you the information.
Yeah. All right, that sounds good. All right, Brian, thank you for that information. Other than that, too, tomorrow night is prayer. That's at 7 o'clock here, so if you'd like to join us for that, please do. But if for some reason you can't be here with us, don't do life alone. If you have prayer requests, please let us know so we can be praying with you and for you. You can send some prayer requests right here in the message column for the video today, or you can just send us. You can go online to our website at anycommunity.org, and there should be a little box or an icon there that says prayer requests, and then you can go there and you can fill out a form, give your prayer request. We'll get that, and then we can be praying with you and for you about that, okay? Today I wanted to talk to you about the veil of Moses. Now, I don't know how many of you have read Exodus chapter 34. Chapter 24 is where Moses comes down and finds all the children after he has received the Ten Commandments. He finds the children of Israel creating idols and worshiping other things. But in Exodus 34, he's back up on the mountain again there in Mount Sinai, and he is receiving by the hand of God the Ten Commandments again. And the Bible tells us that he's up there for 40 days, and he didn't have anything to drink, and he didn't have anything to eat. He was solely in the presence of the Lord. And the presence of the Lord is what was sustaining him and causing him to have the power and the strength to be able to be in communion with God. And then he comes down off the mountain with these 10 commandments. And the Bible tells us there in Exodus 34 that the people, his face was so brilliant. It had God's glory on it, and it shined so brilliantly that the people could not look intently into Moses' face. So what they did was they created a shield for him, they called it a veil. It's called a veil in there. In Exodus 34, the word there for veil, it's the only time it's used there is for this word veil. But they created a veil for his face, and he would put that over his face when he was talking with the people. But when he went in to talk with God face to face, he would take the veil off. And his glory would shine, and so that he had to put that veil on there. It kind of goes back to when the people were so fearful of God and the mountain, and if anybody touched the mountain, they would die, and if any animals got too close to it and touched it, they would die. And so they said, Moses, you go up and you find out what God has to say, and then you bring it back to us. And so there was always this kind of separation between God and his people. And so it was coming through Moses. Anything God wanted to say, he would come through Moses. And then later on, when they build the tabernacle, you have this veil that is created that is put between the outer part of you have the inner part, the place where the showbread is and the lampstands. And then right past that is called the holiest of holies, which is where the priest would only go in. And when they would go in, they had to go past this veil, and they would put blood on the mercy seat for the atonement of sins. And that's where God's presence was said to have come down in a cloud by day and a fire by night. But this presence would come down, and it would fill the whole tabernacle with this cloud of smoke. And so that's where God's presence was represented, and that's where the mercy seat was, because when they would put that blood there, God would have mercy on his people. But there was a veil that separated that part of the temple, and only the priests could go into that. And so when you look at the story of Moses coming down off the mountain, and he has to have a veil on his face because the people can't look intently into God's glory, it tells you that there was still, even in the Old Testament, even with the law, with the Ten Commandments, there was still a separation between the people and God. There was still something standing in the way of this intimate relationship that people could have with God. And God was longing and going to make that, he was going to change that whole thing, but it wouldn't come until after Jesus comes. And so Paul then, I was reading this morning, and Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to 2 Corinthians. But this is really the main understanding of the veil that Moses wore. So if you go to 2 Corinthians, and specifically in chapter 3, Paul talks about this veil in relation to the Corinthian people and their opportunity that they have to be in the presence of God and to know him intimately. So I want to just read, it's not a long chapter, it's just 18 verses. I want to read 2 Corinthians chapter 3, and then I want us to just walk through it and just get a picture of this veil and what is going on with Moses and what's going on when Jesus shows up and after Jesus has died for our sins and been resurrected. So this is what Paul says in chapter 3, verse 1. Are we beginning to commend ourselves again, or do we need as some letters of commendation to you or from you? You are our letter, written in our hearts, known and ready by all men, being manifested that you are a letter of Christ, cared for by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. So let's just stop there for a second. Verses 1 through 3, Paul is saying, listen, it appears that when people would come to congregations or groups of people, they would bring letters. It was kind of the custom to bring a letter so that the congregation knew that these people were approved of by the apostles or by other people that were leading in the church. So that they would know that, hey, we can trust this person. Paul says here, are we coming again to you, and we have to commend ourselves again to you? We have to give you another letter of commendation, so that you know that you can trust us. But Paul says, but you're our letter. Matter of fact, everything that has been written on you, everything that God has done in your life, you're the letter of Christ. He goes on to say here, he says, being manifested that you are a letter of Christ, verse 3. He said, cared for by us. We've cared for you. We've taught you. We've come and we've made ourselves available to make disciples with you. But he says, listen, this letter that Christ has written in you was not written with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. And it was not on tablets of stone, but it was on tablets of human hearts, the human hearts of the people there. So God here, this is going back to Old Testament prophecy, that one day there would come a time where the human heart would no longer be a heart of stone, but a heart of flesh, and God would put that in them as people. And so Paul is alluding back to the Old Testament again, and he's saying, listen, the Spirit of the living God has written on your hearts, and the letter that is written there is our letter to you. I mean, it's who you're our letter. Just the way that God's been transforming your lives, you're our letter. So then in verses 4 through 6, he says this, such confidence we have through Christ toward God, now that we are adequate, or not that we are adequate in ourselves to consider anything as coming from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God, who also made us adequate as servants of a new covenant, not of the heart, or not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. So Paul is saying, listen, I want you to know that we don't take any confidence in ourselves. Okay, verse 4, such confidence we have through Christ toward God. That's it. We don't take any confidence in ourselves. We're not adequate, but the reason we tell you that we are adequate to speak to you on God's behalf is because God is the one who has made us adequate for this purpose. And it says in verse 6, he also made us adequate as servants of a new covenant. So we are coming to you with a brand new covenant, and he says, not the letter, but of the Spirit. So not of the letter, but of the Spirit. So it's not the letter of the law, it's of the Spirit. The letter of the law kills, he says. That pretty much, it doesn't do anything to save you. Matter of fact, you can know you're doing wrong, but you still can't be saved because you can't do anything to save yourself. So the letter lets you know that you're a sinner, and it lets you know what God's standard is, but you can't do anything to find forgiveness in that. But he says here in verse 6, he said, but it's of the Spirit which gives life. So Paul says, listen, we know we're not adequate, but God has made us adequate to bring you this message, that it's the Spirit of God that brings life to you, not the letter or the law. So then in verses 7 through 11, let me read that. But if the ministry of death in letters engraved on stones, and he's talking about the Ten Commandments, and he's calling it the ministry of death, he says, if it came with glory, that's the glory going back to Exodus 34, the glory that was on Moses' face, that he had to put a veil over his face so that because the people could not look intently at it. And Paul goes on to say this, so that the sons of Israel could not look intently at the face of Moses because of the glory on his face, fading as it was. Verse 8, how will the ministry of the Spirit fail to be even more with glory? So if there was that much glory in the letter that comes and kills, the ministry of death that shows you that you are lost without God and that you have sinned against God and there's no forgiveness apart from God, if that's the case and glory came with that, then how much more glory would come with the ministry of the Spirit? Verse 9, for if the ministry of condemnation has glory, so if the law, which tells you you're condemned because of your sin, if that came with glory, how much more does the ministry of righteousness abound in glory? So Paul is trying to say that this story of Christ, his death and his resurrection, and the fact that his Spirit now can come to live in us and help us to live as God created us to live, how much more glory is found in that than in the law of condemnation or the ministry of condemnation. Verse 10, for indeed what had glory in this case has no glory because of the glory that surpasses it. So he's saying now, it's almost as if there was no glory on Moses' face, because the glory that is in the Spirit is so much more and so much better now. Verse 11, for if that which fades away was with glory, much more that which remains is in glory. And so you see this constant reference back to the glory that was on Moses' face, which was the presence of God, the power, the truth of God, and we'll get to that in just a second. But he had it veiled because they couldn't look intimately at it. But Paul's saying, listen, there's this new glory that's showing up, and that's the glory that comes by the Spirit of God, which gives you full access into his presence. So that's where verses 12 through 18 come. Now, I want you to look carefully with me at verses 12 through 18, because this is really, really important. Paul says this in verse 12, therefore, having such a hope, we use great boldness in our speech. So Paul's saying, listen, I'm not adequate to come to you and speak to you. I don't have a letter of commendation, but God has made me adequate. And the letter that we have to you is you, the fact that the Spirit of God has changed you. And that should be enough for you to listen to what we have to say. And so Paul says, I have this great boldness in speech. Verse 13, and we, this is Paul speaking, Paul says, we and the apostles, we are not like Moses, who used to put a veil over his face so that the sons of Israel would not look intently at the end of what was fading away. But their minds were hardened, for until this very day at the reading of the Old Covenant, the same veil remains unlifted because it is removed in Christ. And so Paul says, listen, we don't have a veil on our face anymore. We're telling you straight up the way it is. And the way it is that this veil has been removed in Christ Jesus. There is no veil anymore. You can have full access into the presence of God through the person of Jesus Christ, he says. And we're coming to you with this kind of speech. We're not like Moses. We don't have a veil anymore on our face. We want you to see all the glory of God. And we want you to know that the glory of God is available to every single one of you to see. For you to know him intimately, it's available for you. Verse 15, but to this day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts. So if you're continuing to believe anything other than the truth of Christ and his deliverance, then there's always going to be a veil. Even Old Testament. You can read the Old Testament, but you always see the hope in the Old Testament. You always see the hope of Christ Jesus. But the Old Testament doesn't save. Matter of fact, the New Testament doesn't even save. It's Jesus who saves. But Paul says, listen, there's always going to be a veil there. So for Jewish people today who believe and trust in the Old Testament and they read their Old Testament, it is true that is the God who loves them and wants to save them. But there's a veil because they can't come into this intimate relationship with God, into this glorious relationship with God, because there's a veil there because they're missing the person of Jesus Christ. They're not going through the person of Jesus Christ. So then in verse 17, now the Lord is the Spirit. And listen to this. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Now I want to take you back up to verse 16 because I missed that. I thought I had gone too far, but I missed that. So let's just go back up. Before we hit verse 17, let's go back up to 16. But whenever a person turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. So, glory of God on Moses' face. Veil over it because the people couldn't look intimately into it. Paul says here, anyone who turns and trusts in Jesus Christ, the veil between them and God will be lifted and they will be able to see the glory of God. When you turn and begin to trust Jesus Christ, you'll be able to see the glory of God. You don't have to have anybody show it to you. You don't have to have anybody tell you about it. You can see it as long as you turn to Jesus. The veil will be lifted and you will be able to see the full glory of who God is. Now verse 17. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Now this verse here can make or break your relationship with Christ. Because some people will look at this and they will say, see, Paul is saying that the Old Testament, which brought death and was a ministry that killed, it was a ministry of death, and it was the condemnation, ministry of condemnation, and it didn't save anyone. That means that when I come to know Christ, I now have liberty. And so when I put my trust in Christ, I can pretty much live however I want. I can do whatever I want. Jesus always forgives me, and I have full salvation in him. And that's true. When you turn to Jesus Christ, he brings salvation to you. But the salvation rests in the transformation that he wants to do in your life to bring you back to the full image of what he created you in. And that's the reason he died for you. He didn't die for you just to get you to heaven. I mean, yes, he wants to take the wrath away. Yes, he wants to take judgment away. And he wants to do all that for you. But he didn't die so that you could go to heaven and have your own way. He died so that you could be brought back and restored to the image that you were created in. That's what salvation looks like. Salvation isn't a ticket to go to heaven when you die so that you don't have to go to hell. Salvation is God taking your place in death so that you might have life and be restored to a resurrected life, which is in the image of who Christ is and how God created you to be. So I want to show you that then in this very last verse. So in verse 17, when Paul says, now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So if the Spirit is now living in me, I have liberty or freedom. But this liberty or freedom isn't so that I can just live however I want. No, look at verse 18. But we all with unveiled face. He says, all of us now, those who have turned to Christ, we have unveiled face. Beholding as in a mirror. So I'm looking in a mirror now. So when I look in a mirror, okay, I'm beholding what? The glory of God. The Spirit of God now rests in me. When I look in the mirror now, the person that I see the glory of God on that person. And so if you've put your trust in Jesus Christ, when you look in the mirror, you shouldn't see anything other than a valuable work that God is working on, a valuable individual, that God's glory is on you, and that God is working to transform your life. Look what he says. As in a mirror, the glory of the Lord are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord the Spirit. So you are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory. So when I look in the mirror now, I've turned to Jesus, and it says in there, Paul says, when you turn to Jesus, the veil is lifted, right? And so when I turn to Jesus, now the veil has been lifted. The glory of God is on me. The Spirit of God lives in me. And when I look in the mirror and I behold, I see the glory of God. And what is the glory of God doing? It's transforming me from glory to glory. So when you think about this, here's what's happening here. It takes us back to, for instance, John. And in John chapter 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then if you go down to verse 14, it says, and the Word became flesh, and the Word dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. That's the glory as of the only begotten from the Father, and it's full of grace and truth. Grace and truth. Now, it even takes us back, for instance, to Mark chapter 15, verse 38. And when Jesus died on the cross, Mark tells us in 15:38 that the veil in the temple was torn from top to bottom, which meant that when Jesus Christ died, that veil was torn, and there was no longer a veil separating you and me from the intimate relationship that we can have with God. So then Jesus, who became flesh, and we beheld, John says, his glory. And then it tells us when he died, he tore that veil from top to bottom in the temple to show that we now have access to God the Father through Jesus Christ. So here's the idea. So now all of a sudden, I turn to Jesus Christ, who is the glory as of the only begotten from the Father. He's the glory. So I turn to Jesus now. Jesus now comes. He comes and lives in me by his Spirit. And now as I look in a mirror, as if I'm beholding the glory of God in me, it's transforming me. And how is it transforming me? Well, exactly what is glory full of? In John chapter 1, verse 14, we beheld his glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth.
And so that glory that is all over you, if you're a follower of Jesus, that glory is full of grace, which grace is the power to do in you what you can't do for yourself. So it's full of grace and it's full of truth. And so that truth is something then that you and I need to search out. We need to constantly be searching out. Proverbs chapter 2 tells us that if we want to find wisdom, you have to seek it as silver and search for it as for hidden treasure. And then you will discern the fear of the Lord, and then you will discover the knowledge of God. So you seek out the truth, and by God's grace, doing in you what you can't do for yourself, he is now transforming you back to the image, the same image from glory to glory, back to that image that you were created in, the very image of God. So that's what the veil of Moses was about. The veil of Moses was this picture that because of our sin, we were separated from God's glory. But Jesus, who was the fullness of God's glory, came and he died and he rose again. And so then if we turn to him and we place our trust in Jesus, what we're doing is we are looking at the glory of God, Jesus Christ himself. And then that glory comes to live in us. And when that glory lives in us, the goal of that glory is to transform us by God's grace and his truth. And it transforms us to bring us back to the image of God that we were created in. All right? So that's the idea of the veil of Moses. No more veil. It's gone. All you got to do is turn to Jesus, the glory of God. And that glory will come in and begin to transform your life. I would encourage you today, if you have not turned to Jesus, turn to his glory, God's glory in the person of Jesus. I would encourage you to do that right now. I would encourage you to put your trust and faith in the person of Jesus Christ and then begin to develop a relationship with him through his word and through his people and learn who he is and what he desires of you and let him transform you back into the image that you were created in. And if you have been following Jesus, but you've never seen Jesus quite like you have today in the veil being lifted and the fact of who Jesus is, that glory that has come to transform your life, maybe today you just want to commit or make a new commitment to God and say, God, I want all of your glory in my life. I want your grace and your truth to just flood me so that when I look in the mirror, I don't see Brian anymore. I see the glory of God transforming me and changing me by your power so that I might become the person that you've created me to be in your image, the very image of God. So I hope that was helpful today. I hope that was encouraging to you. I found it encouraging to myself because I know that that's something that I've longed for years, and that is God's transforming power in my life. And to see that there is nothing that stands in the way. There's absolutely nothing that stands in the way. No veil anymore. And that glory can be mine as I turn to Christ and let him transform me by his grace and his truth. So I encourage you to do that today. So that is it for me today. I'm glad for all of you that tuned in to watch and those of you that will watch at a later time. So may the Lord bless you and may he keep you and cause his face to shine upon you. That's glory. May he cause his face to shine upon you. You have a great rest of the week, and who knows, maybe we'll see you at prayer, or maybe we'll see you Sunday in church at 11 o'clock here at Northeast Community. Brian, that's it. You got anything else to say?